We have three basic states. Everybody is familiar with them. Why? Because you experience them every 24-hour cycle. You have the waking state, which attenuates primarily to the physical body, waking state. Subtle physical body, sleep with dream state. And deep sleep state, causal body. And you cycle between the three worlds every day, 24 hours. And each one of those worlds is so different. If you saw a movie of each one of them side by side, you wouldn't see any relationship. They don't appear the same, don't feel the same. Which is what makes the the human body so dramatic. Right now, at this time, in this place, on this world system, the physical body has been hardwired to exactly the manifestation of the world system itself, the forces of creation of that world system. It's in you, of you, as you. It's a fruit in your hand. If it was a snake, it would bite you. It's so close. And this is the whole idea of meditation. Because what have we left out? The fourth state. That state of consciousness, which is not ruled by the six sensory fields of the physical body, not ruled by the subtle physical body necessarily, or not ruled by the mental body, but is a part of all of them. And so, it is the one state we have available to us, because we are aware of the fact that we're in the waking state, we're in the world. And the physical world is dominant, even though the subtle physical world is right there, our senses don't so much see it. We have to go through a deconditioning. The mental body and the world of the mental universe. So subtle that we only know it as the fabric of the movement of our own mind, most of which we dedicate to the product of the ego, which is so coarse, it's very, very coarse by standards of consciousness. It's so coarse it actually blots out reality. In spiritual training, we are trained to actually see things in reverse. You go through so much deconditioning. The idea of meditation is one of deconditioning the overwhelming impressions of the six sensory fields and the apprehension of the physical world and our attachment to it. And what is the first thing you hear about the world of spiritual life and meditation? It has something to do with diminishing the ego. Don't really know what that actually means, but it does mean something. From the standpoint of reality, the only thing that is true is the fourth state, the world of consciousness. Why? Because it's always there. The standard of truth being that something that's always true. If it's only true some of the time, then it's only relatively true, which means it's not true. But in philosophy and in spiritual life, this idea of relative truth is a way of talking about something that's very difficult to talk about. Like it's only 20% true or 30% true under certain conditions, etc. We'll talk more about that later. But this idea of, okay, we have three relative worlds and one absolute world. Of body, speech, and mind, the physical world, subtle physical world, mental world. And we have three basic states that we are familiar with. We go through them every day. We know they exist. Why? Because we experience them. We have to believe them because we experience them. That's the essence of mysticism. It's all politics of experience. What is that, R.D. Lang? All politics of experience? Very few people have experienced the fourth state. That's why it sounds kind of far out, interesting idea, but there's very little experience of it. But you have to go after it because of its subtlety. And thus we see that a person's incarnation will go through an arc as they gain perception of the path that there is a way off the wheel, I don't know how it is, but I feel something. And they begin to turn their behavior around and begin to act for the sake of others rather than themselves. In other words, they begin to question the primacy of the ego. Which means that you've had enough times where your ego was victorious, and then it was completely defeated and shattered. Then it was victorious, it was completely defeated and shattered. It happens enough times, and you begin to genuinely doubt the existence of the ego and its worthiness as a refuge. In other words, it turns out it was a false refuge all along. It'll never bring you happiness. And if it does, only for a few fleeting seconds, and then it'll change. When that happens, the person has discovered the path. Because a person, once they begin to feel that, they'll begin to change their behavior, and they'll bring that karmic equilibrium into play. The thunderbolt will strike. Now remember, the prime of the thunderbolt is pure consciousness pouring in like a bolt of lightning, striking from the fourth body, through the mental body, through the subtle physical body, through to the physical body. It's it. It becomes one thing all at once, even for 1 second. 1 second of Shaktipat, it's all it takes. Because the system has experienced it, and now it must be accounted for. And if a person is attached to the three relative worlds, and primarily of the three relative worlds, mostly the physical world, it'll actually set, this is actually what people experience after Shaktipat, there's all of a sudden all this dynamic tension because your soul has experienced something that your mind can't interpret. And so you go through this kind of phase where you try to find adjustment. And you'll see a person go through this incredible, it's almost like a death spasm, thrashing about as they try to find a point of equilibrium. And I use the word death spasm because what it is that is going through the spasm is the ego. The second the Shaktipat strikes, the ego is doomed. Because they can't survive in the same place. But there's this play of consciousness as the essence of the Shaktipat begins the process of cessation, the unraveling of samskaras, the deconditioning of those samskaras. And then, I know everybody experiences it. I experienced it, you're experiencing it, where the ego is going, wait a minute, those were my favorite samskaras. Well, I didn't get that memo. And that way, in that case, the Shaktipat is very ruthless. It's like a force of nature. It doesn't mean, you get to keep your favorite samskaras and get rid of the bad ones. They all got to go. This is where the dynamic of the Guru Shakti comes in, because it does mitigate. It tends to go for the worst first. And it works out kind of like an antitoxin and goes through and starts to root out the dark reservoirs that are essentially various forms of fear, which is what the ego thrives on, the whole idea of separation. The ego sees the interconnectedness of all things as the kiss of death, and will hold that story in place forever. I am separate, I am different, I am special. And you go through kind of degrees of revelation. And I think that's actually also one of the aspects of the Guru Shakti. If it was just raw power, the surgery would be a success, but the patient would die. So it's a very subtle process that produces a very selective unraveling of samskaras, which are essentially, remember that like I said, the ego has chosen from a list, like one from column A, one from column B, column C, to produce the samskaric set that you are operating on right now. I would say the ratio is very high. The ones that you are operating on are just 1% and 98% are recessive. That doesn't mean that they're not producing conditioning factors. In fact, they're more subversive because they're conditioning unconsciously. So this idea of slowly but surely becoming conscious of and awakened to the totality of your own reality, the reality of the egocentric I, which rules predominantly in the waking state. That's where the ego is most dominant. Because we oftentimes see in our dream states, our ego becomes highly flexible. And the identities that we select in the dream states have a vast variety. What's happening there? But the recessive samskaras that are asserting themselves subconsciously are asserting themselves consciously in the dream state. So we see that the ego is highly mutable in the dream state. And you can see that the necessity for the dream state becomes, because it's a safety valve for all of that unconscious pressure. Which is why everybody, Western psychology has several streams of self-study that are based on the analysis of dreams. That the subconscious is expressing itself, and these are the true dynamic forces of the identity. And you look for those themes and constant themes, et cetera, and actually an accurate analysis can be generated.